All right, everybody, welcome to our virtual bourbon event. We've got a fun one tonight. It's the Dusty series led by Wes Hardin, who's out doing the hard work for you guys, out searching the world to find these unique Dusties. And we always have a little fun with it when we try the current version. We do it blind and we try to see if we can guess what is what. We also like to say which one we like better. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing. Maybe you like the newer version better. So it should be a fun event tonight. Wes Hardin leading that. And of course, we have a special guest here as well, Mr. Freddie Noe of Jim Beam. Hey, Freddie, how you doing?
Hey, Steve, how's it going? I'm not going to lie. When I found out I was going to have to be picking out this bottle, I brought my ringer with me. So I had to bring somebody else with me tonight.
Oh, Pops is there. All right.
We're talking about old Dusties. That's why he brought me out.
Wow. What a treat this is.
Yeah,
you
Dusty Freddie. I didn't know something was up. He didn't give me all the details.
Right. He didn't give you all the details. Very, very good. So, wow, this is a great event anyway, and it just got a little bit better, folks. That's a great surprise. So very fun stuff. No pressure. You guys might learn a little something from Wes here tonight. He'll get into brand history.
That.
Yeah, no pressure, Wes. All right, buddy. So take it away, my friend.
All right, so welcome everyone. We're doing a Dusty event. We're gonna look at Old Granddad 114. Everyone should have two samples, and obviously, like we do all these events, we're not going to tell everyone what they are ahead of time. We're going to save that for the end. Everyone should have an Old Granddad 114 event A, and everyone should have a either one of two things. Your second one should either be like Steve has with the black label, or it should say Old Granddad 114 BLK Black. So that's going to be your sample B, for lack of better terms. So there's a lot of people on from our previous event where we looked at just Old Granddad Dusty versus a recent. We kind of went through some of the history, but I found this old 114 ND, which is one of the two samples, and it's going to go up against the current Old Granddad 114. So I decided it'd be a good time to have another event. Luckily, our good friends, the Noes, are going to join us, so that makes the event even better. So some of the history we're going to go through, and obviously Fred and Freddie jump in anytime, because you guys obviously know the history better than Steve or I do for sure. But some of this will be a repeat. There is a little bit of information specific to the 114, but we have a lot of people on that weren't on the previous events, so it's going to be pretty fresh for everyone. Before we get started, one thing I like to start doing that we've been doing here the last few events, let's take out sample A. Let's go ahead and pour sample A. And while I get into the history, let's let everyone start getting in and nosing, looking at it in the glass, and start sipping. I'll go through some of the history, and then we'll jump in and start sampling and exchanging notes and so forth on the first one. So Old Granddad, very historic brand. As a lot of people know, and most everyone on this event knows, the brand's been around for about 144 years. Specifically the 114 proof, it was added in the 70s. And it was added in the 70s. That's obviously an unfortunate time for the whiskey industry. Bourbon sales were starting to squander. The clear liquids were coming up. So, and obviously, Fred knows this more than I do. But one of the big markets at that time to help keep the industry afloat was the export market, specifically the Japanese market. So the 114 was pretty popular in Japan during that time, and it was a big export item. But for the brand itself, there was a distillery created in 1840 by Raymond Hayden, and it was named after his grandfather Meredith Basil Hayden Sr. So the picture on the front of all the Old Granddad bottles is a picture of Basil Hayden. However, with the exception of the old 114, I call it the black and gold label. That version that the ND had, and when Beam purchased ND back in '87, they ended up transforming that old label into, there was an in-between version, but all of the versions after that had Basil Hayden on the label. But the National Distillers Old Grandad 114 was the only Old Grandad label that did not have a picture of him on the label. So there was a point in time when Indy introduced that 114. They didn't put his face on there, but Beam corrected that once they came along. And so all of the current 114s obviously have a picture of Basil Hayden as well as the 80 proof and the Bourbon that we have today. But there was a time where the 114 did not have his picture on there. That would be the exception to that. As we know, Basil Hayden, he's one of our bourbon pioneers. He's got his own brand at Beam Suntory. He's had it for a while. Just a quick history on him, and again, please jump in, Fred. But Basil Hayden, he led a group of about 25 Catholic families from Maryland into Kentucky. They settled in what's today Bardstown, basically. And like most settlers back then, they have their property, they cleared the field, they established a farm. What grows well? Corn grows well. And then what do you do with your excess corn? They went back to the old roots. They started distilling corn. And then obviously we all know the story of corn whiskey. And then it went into, ends up becoming bourbon. Upon his death in 1820, his son Louis actually took over, and he continued distilling. And this is part of, in our Disty's events, we talk about these heritage families and these heritage brands, the Beams, the Dance, you can go on and on. They're so intertwined in the industry. And this brand and this family, the Haydens are no exceptions. Louis married a woman named Polly Dant, from that long lineage and history of the Dant family. So that's just another example of how a lot of these heritage legacy brands and families just throughout history just intermingle with each other, whether it's through marriage, it's through family, it's through acquisitions. It's just it's in some ways one large tree with a ton of different branches on it. In the 1840s, Louis died, and second son Raymond Bishop, RB as he was known, he assumed control of the farm and distillery. And in 1882, he built the RB Hayden and Company distillery at Hobbs Station in Nelson County. I want to ask Fred, where is Hobbs Station, or where was Hobbs Station at, Fred?
Hobbs Station, really today, they probably redone the county lines, but it's actually in Bullitt County, right up the creek from Claremont.
Okay.
We used to laugh. If you take the dinner train from Bardstown and it turns around at our Chappies plant, Dad pointed out the first time I rode it with him, the old warehouse foundations that are up the track from the Claremont ABV Beam Distilling Company. So they were like up the creek neighbors back in the day. The old Granddad Distillery was right up the creek from the Beam place, but that was the old Murphy Barber place in those days. They weren't up the creek when Jim Beam reopened it after Prohibition, but that was back in the early days. But Hobbs Station lays between the Lotus, if you're familiar with the area, between the Lotus warehouses and
Four Roses area.
Four Roses.
Okay. All right.
And,
Yeah, that gives me I had no idea where it was at. I knew it was somewhere in the area, but that gives me.
Right off Highway 245. There's road.
Okay.
Hobbs Station Road still there.
Very nice. Thank you for that. Let's take a quick break before I jump in any more of the history. Let's take this first sample, call it sample A. Want to get the group's impression on nose, mouthfeel, looks, and if you had a chance to sip it, what kind of tasting notes and nosing you're getting off of it. I think the one prominent thing that you know pretty quickly is, if you don't know, you figure out pretty quickly it's a high rye bourbon. It's got a really nice long Kentucky hug, nice finish on it. That is for sure a staple in this particular sample. Anybody have any nosing, tasting notes they want to jump in and start plugging away? I'll jump in if everybody's scared. The one thing I get on the nose, I get a pretty heavy cherry stone fruit note on the nose.
Mhm.
I was gonna say stone fruit.
Okay.
And
Okay.
caramel too.
Caramel. Yep.
You get a little bit of cinnamon on there also.
A little cinnamon.
So I tend to get some of that cinnamon, a little bit more on the spice side on the nose of this one.
Yeah, it looks like Danny typed in the chat honey. Get some honey
Getting
out
some
of there.
honey. Okay.
A good mouthfeel.
Got a real good
Mhm.
mouthfeel.
Yeah.
Viscosity is real good.
Looks like we got another. Looks like Jason in the chat says golden syrup and vanilla corn puffs.
Corn
Sounds
puffs.
good.
I like the syrup reference, very
Mhm.
viscous.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, great mouthfeel, full bodied.
Great legs.
Proof is great. Nice. Just nice hug. I mean, really good.
Yeah, for 114, it's got the finish that you would expect, or at least what I would expect anyway.
Mhm.
That's that 114 to me, 105 to 115 is kind of the sweet spot, higher barrel proof. You get over 115, you start really getting into some high heat. It has to be a pretty perfected bourbon, in my personal opinion, to be able to drink neat for and still get the flavors out without burning your palate out with that super high proof stuff. We know we've had I think the last event, Dusty event that Freddie was on, we did the Dusty Bookers versus a recent batch, and
Yep.
both of those are higher proof. They all the Bookers batches hold up very well. They're very approachable, but they still let you know that they're unfiltered and barrel proof. So this 114 follows right along with that.
I tend to agree with you. I think anywhere around 110 and above, I think you're drinking 2 or 3 or more, samples, or you're, doing a tasting or assessing those samples. Even our blender, Don McGrew, he at times will say 5 or 6 will fatigue him out at barrel strength, and he's doing it quite often. So there's definitely palate fatigue comes about. So to your point, having something that's high proof like that, it's got to be something kind of perfected. So I'd almost throw, in my opinion, this proof in there. For me, I think anything over 110 gets to a place where you got to, you know what I mean? You got to be locking in on what you're looking for and what you're doing, or I think it can get a little too hot for more people than not, I guess would be a way I'd put it.
Yeah, that's the popular trend with a lot of like some of the newer bourbon enthusiasts is the only way to go is super high barrel proof, and they're good to drink. I know Steve's a big fan. I think everybody on here is a big fan of barrel proof, but I'm a huge proponent of drinking up and down the proof range to kind of train your palate, give your palate a break. There's a lot of really good flavors you can pull out of certain 80s and 86s and 90s and 94s. My perfect sweet spot. I love 100 proof bottled and bond about anywhere you go. I just think that's the perfect sipping proof for my personal taste. And I do like a lot of high proof stuff, but if you're one of those people that just goes high proof at some point, it's just going to burn you out. I think it's good to go up and down the proof range.
This one is so unique though, because, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 114 proof. I mean, they just didn't do that. I mean,
yeah, I mean, if you take a look at history, and Fred again obviously knows more than anybody that's on this call today. 80 proof and 86 were kind of where it was at. You had some 90s. Stitzelweller was big on the 90 proof. You had 100 proof bottled and bond was that was quote unquote the high proof stuff of the time.
Absolutely.
And then this 114, at least in all of my research of Dusty's outside of, so when we get into the 70s and 80s, we have the start of the glut era. You had 80s and into the 90s and early 2000s, you had some other companies like Willett and KBD that were coming in. They weren't distilling anything. They were buying up all the extra aged stock from Heaven Hill. They may or may not have purchased some stuff from you guys at the time. they started playing around and started, blending and releasing special releases of barrel proof under Old St. Nick and some of those brands and Johnny Drum and some stuff like that. But as far as distilling a distillery setting out to release a product specifically at a higher than 100 proof level, I don't know that I can find anybody that did that prior to you guys doing the 114. There may be someone out there. It doesn't come to mind for me.
Yeah, I
That's
think
what I
you're
was
right.
gonna say. I wonder if it was the highest proof product. It probably was the highest proof product on the market for a while there when it came out, right in the 70s.
Right. And then when Dad released Booker's,
Yep.
It went over because it was straight from the barrel. But then there was a resurgence of the Granddad 114 within our company because we discovered, a lot of these brands that National had, were there, but they weren't really that strong. And so when Booker's came out and they saw there was a market for high proof bourbon, Dad started playing a little bit with some of the Granddad liquor that they had aging up in Frankfurt. And we discovered, that, hey, let's rejuvenate that 114. And at the time, our big move was to do the Beams Black Label at 90 proof, 101 months old in the 70s and 80s, which was a good one that, I kind of cut my teeth on when I first started stealing stuff out of my dad's liquor cabinet, but we don't want to get into those stories tonight. But, that was, and like I say, Dad always drank Old Tub at 100 proof and all the, bonded beam stuff at 100, but you didn't really see anything 114 or anything over 100 much at all. It was and then when he came out with the Bookers, it kind of opened the door for a lot of high proof stuff, and we rejuvenated this brand.
That changed everything. Yeah.
Yeah. I
and a lot of our competitors thought he was crazy for doing it. I mean, what are you doing?
Right.
No, he was a visionary for sure. I mean, if you take a look at, again, what's the most popular today, it's barrel proof, and then barrel proof. I mean, there's a lot of people that scoff at the idea of things like, people now only want to drink Elijah Craig barrel proof. They don't even want to entertain the 94 anymore. Like it's just, that's the hot item, and your dad and Beam as a whole were definitely at the forefront, starting with the 114, then you get the Bookers, and then everybody else kind of jumped in after that. And like I said, once the whiskey glut happened and everyone's selling off barrels of things they can't get rid of, then you had kind of the 90s and early 2000s rebottles and labelers like KBD and some of the other groups, and then they start releasing cast strength this and cast strength that, and that's those are still some of the most sought out Dusties. No one has any idea where they came from, and there's no trail of whether they're Heaven Hill, Beam, Brown Foreman. I mean, there's all kinds of rumors, but yeah, you guys are definitely at the forefront of the higher proof barrel strength category for sure. A couple of items from the chat here. Just want to make sure and recognize. Got a couple of people that are saying they get a little bit of molasses now on the nose. I think that and the honey kind of go together. There's a floral pine note, so that's not unexpected from a high rye bourbon for sure. And then someone had a question about age statement. So there was no and there is no age statement on Old Granddad 114. I think the general consensus here's the beautiful thing about the 70s, 80s, and 90s is age statements, probably more so than any time ever, were an absolute minimum, and distilleries were just trying to move and get rid of products. So it's very common with a lot of distilleries that a 6-year age statement may have up to 8, 9, 10-year-old whiskey mixed into it if it's not a single barrel. And I would be willing to guess the 114 from the 70s and 80s probably had a pretty good chance of having some older whiskey in it. Fred, do you guys happen to know what the old ND, around what kind of age range those were at? Do you have any idea?
Not really. It was, as you said, the age statements were a number, but it was always older than that. I mean, because that was the minimum, and very seldom were you ever on birthday whiskey when you were dumping barrels. There was always.
Yeah, I had heard that, like typical National Distillers products, there's not much that they had that was over 8 years old. They typically, their sweet spot was the 4-year bottle and bond all the way up to the 8. Every once in a blue moon, you may run across an old granddad that's like 9 years or something odd
Right.
like that. My guess is whichever one of these is the Dusty's, probably anywhere from 6 to 8 years. And then whichever one, obviously you guys could speak to, I know there's not an age statement on your current product, but is there a range on what you guys are doing with the current 114?
It still varies a little bit, probably between 5 and
Okay,
7 or 8.
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I'd
So they're
say
probably
you-
pretty comparable.
You're not seeing anything under 4.5, I would say. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I would say definitely not much lower than 4.5, if 4.5 is in there.
Okay.
But to his point, probably up to 6.5 to 7, depending on, I'd say if there is 4.5 year in there, there's probably a lot of 6 to 7 in there as well, due to how we do a lot of our batching. So he's probably got a good, I'd say probably 5.5 years would be probably a good set standard that you would say an average would probably lay out to be 5.5.
A lot of times they go for a taste profile,
Right.
take older stuff.
Yep.
It always takes a lot more older to bring the younger up. Just a little bit of younger bourbon will bring the graininess that hadn't really gotten out of it yet. So, not seeing any of it in it, there's got to be a lot of older stuff in it. If there was any 4.5, you would
Okay.
pick up a lot more graininess. So I'd say they're, doing probably a 6-year-old taste profile. Is my guess.
All right. Well, I'm going to push on through some of the history. If anybody else has any comments on that first sample, just stop along the way. We'll take any of those if people are still evaluating it. But we kind of got to the point where it's in the late 1800s. R.B. Hayden took on a partner, F.L. Farrell. They built that distillery, had a capacity of about 100 bushels daily, and they could store about 7,000 barrels in their rick house. And it was the whiskey from that distillery that was actually first branded as Old Grandad. So 1882, a little bit after that, that's when the actual, they've been using that whiskey in other labels before, but that's when it started being branded as Old Grandad. And after only 3 years of opening that distillery, RB died. And what was strange is he didn't have any heirs. There were no heirs. He was the last of that family line as far as the true line of Hayden. For a short time, the distillery was owned by a furrier and a stock breeder, but was ultimately sold in 1899 to the Wathen family. So the Wathen family is another one of those legacy families that are kind of woven throughout the bourbon history. There's actually still a bourbon named after the Wathen family. They were tied in for years to distilleries in Owensboro as well, but they actually owned this distillery, and then they changed it after they bought it. They actually changed it to the Old Grandad Distillery, and they opened a sales office in Louisville. So that was pretty common back then, especially pre-Prohibition. You do all the hard work and the distilling out in the country where you have your farms and
Water
and your
source,
labor,
and all that kind of
horses
stuff, yeah.
and everything, and you're close to rivers and you're close to trains. And you did all your sales and financing out of the big city of Louisville, or Lexington in some cases, but in this case it's Louisville. Nace Wathen became the distiller and manager of the distillery. 1900, it was destroyed in a fire, like a lot of distilleries did back then. Once a fire hit a distillery, even today, it would be hard to contain it. But back then, with bucket brigades and things of that nature, it's almost impossible to keep it from burning to the ground, which is what happened. They rebuilt it up, and up until Prohibition, they produced about 400 bushels of mash per day. As we know, once Prohibition started, the Wathens actually created the American Medicinal Spirits Company. They purchased and bought and used all of their age stock that they could get. They received permits through different companies, and they were producing and selling different bourbons with their medicinal license throughout Prohibition. But after Prohibition, that particular distillery ended up shutting down. They took all the bourbon, they moved them to American Medicinal Spirits warehouses. They let the distillery go into a state of shambles. And then basically today, there's no visible remains of that distillery anywhere. And in 1929, American Medicinal Spirits was purchased by National Distillers. An odd piece of things that I found, and I don't know, Fred, if this is anything you've ever heard before or not, but there's at least one historian that believes that during Prohibition, Old Grandad was produced in Canada as a, in quotations, American bourbon style product. I've never seen a bottle. I've never heard of a bottle. I don't know if that's a true story or someone's making that up, but I did find that out there in my research, that some historian seems to think that during Prohibition that Canada was producing some sort of,
But I mean,
Canadian
and technically
whiskey.
they could have called it bourbon at that point, right? That's before 64 when all that was formalized. So
exactly.
that's why you got that stuff coming out of Juarez, Mexico that
Yep,
says bourbon and
exactly.
stuff like that. So yeah.
So I've never seen one. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. It was just kind of odd piece of information that I found researching. After Prohibition, Old Grandad started production again. And it was produced actually at various distilleries in Kentucky. In 1940, National Distillers purchased the K. Taylor Distilling Company in Frankfurt, and then they renamed it the Old Grandad Distillery, which is what it remained basically all the way up until being purchased. So you guys purchased ND in 87, and you guys kept the brand, obviously. One interesting piece of information is, National Distillers had quite a large portfolio, but they were really famous for the brand they called the Olds: Old Taylor, Old Overholt, Old Grandad. And so the Old Crow, thank you. Old Grandad would be the only version of the Olds that Beam Suntory kept the mash bill the same and kind of kept everything like it was. I know some of the other brands changed some proofs and changed the mash bills and some of the ages a little bit, but that was the one that you guys kind of chose to leave as is. I think the only difference was at some point the 86 proof dropped and you have the 80, the 100 proof bottled and bond, and the 114. But outside of that, no change in mash bill, similar taste profile, kept to the same kind of age window, for lack of better terms. That was the probably the only one of those brands that kind of stayed the same.
It was, to be honest with you, it's probably because we've recently found some old archives. It was the only mash bill on the archive list that I saw that was being made when we purchased it. The rest of them were all dead mash bills. We also got the yeast strain, which we've kept alive and been propagating as well. So it was, I would say, very important to them as well at National, because it was the most archived brand. They had labels and things, but as far as like mash bills and stuff like that, most of the brands didn't actually fall under the mash bills that we procured, as far as we've seen anyway. So I'd say that probably was a lot of it, is that the other brands had already been kind of drifted away, I guess, from whatever their traditional norms were, or at least from the documentation that resurfaced in the last like 3 years that I'm sure we saw when we first purchased, but no one had seen. It was kind of in this old closet and ended up having a flood, and they cleaned out this closet and found this stuff in the back of it. Found some old labels,
nice.
About 9 or 10 mash bills. Obviously, it confirmed the Old Grandad mash bill. It was on there. There was some, I'm trying to think of these ones were called Bluegrass. There was a couple of Bluegrass rye. I don't know if it was meaning they used Kentucky grain. Like, we didn't see anything called Bluegrass on the label list. So maybe some of that stuff fell under that, but it was all under code. It wasn't deciphered out for us. So I'd say that's probably a lot of the reason why, because like I said, what we do have, we did preserve the mash bill. That was one we did have, and then the yeast strain actually coming over to us, still propagating it similar way. I guess the one interesting thing about that is I never saw any yeast recipes in any of this archive stuff. And I will say that even though it is the Old Grandad yeast strain, we do make it the Jim Beam recipe way. So it's the yeast strain. But I mean, I'm sure again, it's probably because we didn't have a recipe that we could have gone by. But yeah, that's a couple little interesting things there. Another thing that's kind of interesting is you were talking about the RB Hayden and Sons distillery. We've been doing some archiving of our own recently, and it's kind of funny. The ones we've found the most success with are those national distillers brands, the olds as we call them for ours. Obviously, we don't have Old Taylor, but Old Overholt, Old Crow, and Old Grandad particularly. We've found a lot of success kind of looking back and finding old bottles of, and quite a few of them are from that RB Hayden and Sons time frame.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we actually found a pretty big lot of bottles that we purchased that had, I think, about 8 from that time frame in it. I mean, when I say a lot, that's quite a bit, from what we've seen from that time frame.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense because I think it's pretty well. At one time, I think it was a rumor, but I think the last master distiller at Old Crow, and I don't remember what the gentleman's name was. I've got it written down somewhere, but he came out back in the 90s and basically stated for a fact that I think it was 82, they lost their yeast strain. Like all the protocols went away. They literally lost it. And, we talk about in these events, I try to warn people, make sure they do their homework before they buy a dusty bottle from anywhere. They're expensive if you find one. And a dusty NDO Crow from a certain year is not the same as 4 or 5 or 6 years before that, because 82 was about the line of demarcation from a distilling standpoint, where there's, I've had, 84, 85 dusty Old Crows versus like a 78, 79. And there's a drastic difference in those bottles. So I think, yeah, you're probably right. Maybe maybe that's the only mash bill yeast strain combination that stayed intact. And that's the reason it was never, you guys didn't have to recreate it because it was there for you. And you probably had to do something on the Old Crow and Overholt side, just through the changes through the years. All right.
Cool.
Let's go ahead and grab our second sample if you want to.
Okay.
If you guys haven't poured it, let's get that poured, do some nosing and tasting. As far as the history goes, that's pretty much the end of it. Like I said, Beam Suntory purchased National Distillers in 87. We now know that the only change to Old Grandad was they dropped the 86, but they kept the 80, the 100 bottle and bond, the 114. And we've talked about the 114 label prior to Beam purchasing is the only Old Grandad label that for a time did not have a picture of Old Grandad on the label. So it's kind of interesting.
Honey roasted peanuts on the nose.
Honey roasted
Jason.
peanuts. Jason, are you eating honey roasted peanuts? Any chance of that?
He's not admitting to that.
This one's got a little bit of clove on it.
A little cloves.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot less syrup
Less syrup.
on this
Less
one.
syrup.
Less syrup, more like brittle or candy like that.
Okay.
Maybe the bit honey candy.
Yeah, I get a really heavy honey on the nose, and I don't get the roasted peanuts as much yet. I get a little bit of mint too, which I happen to get out of a lot of ryes, and then a lot of high rye bourbons. I tend to get like a lot of the floral type of notes come off to me as mint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I use that term right there, Wes. I call that a little bit more herbal. It's kind of,
Yeah.
to me, it's like a blend of like a really like a mint kind of with some like earthy notes kind of
Yep.
coming together. That's how I kind of
Absolutely.
categorize that mintiness, but I can pick that up.
Yeah, to me, it's still got really nice Kentucky hug. You definitely know it's a 114. But it's not neither one of these to me the finish on these are pretty well the same. I don't see a whole lot of difference in the two. They're both long finish, nice Kentucky hug. I don't get any kind of a lot of people will look at a finish that's long and warm, but it's all heat to them without flavor. I don't get that. I get a nice long cinnamon Kentucky hug on the end.
Yeah, definitely cinnamon. But yeah, you do get kind of the rye notes. It always, I like to say, it's like when your arm falls asleep and then you move it and it's starting to wake up, you get those zingers. You kind of get those the same type of zingers on your tongue when it's a nice high rye.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you're
It's
definitely getting that.
like a mouth water kind
Yeah.
of, it's kind of to your point, the zingers works. Now that you said that, I get a little bit of like a cinnamon hot candy on the finish, like a sweet candy cinnamon, like a little cinnamon hot candy.
Yeah,
Cinnamon gum was I was picking up on it.
Yeah, there you go. It's really good.
Big red chewing
There,
gum.
Big Red. That's the one I couldn't think of.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Big
I
Red.
thought it was like a Big Red with some that dark corn syrup.
Mhm.
Oh, there you go.
Was kind of reminding me of the little cinnamon discs.
Yeah, those. Yep.
Yeah.
The one every grandmother has in their purse.
Mhm.
Yeah, as I'm going back to the nose, I'm starting to get some of that cherry stone fruit on the nose too. And if you haven't, I'd like to challenge everyone to kind of go back. If you have anything left in glass one, or even if you have a couple of drops, go back. I know after setting out in the air for a while, I always like to go back to the samples and you start pulling out. To me, once they set out in air a bit, that's when I really start getting like heavy classic bourbon notes of like caramel, vanilla, things of that nature. It's kind of a cool phenomenon. Like as any, whether it's a old bottle or a new bottle, as it airs out, one of my favorite things to do is after a tasting or just sitting around having a drink the next morning when it's time to grab the glasses and put them in the dishwasher or in the sink, just take a whiff of what is left over from the night before. And it's always like this super heavy caramel, creme brulee, brown sugar, kind of the what I call the greatness of bourbon. It's just interesting how that works.
Mhm.
Yes, that's what I'm getting out of the first one. It's more of the maple caramel type stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely. If you go back to it, it seems to be even further, accentuated than even the first time we went through on the A.
Almost like
I
there's a little
agree,
more butterscotch out of when I go back now.
Mhm.
I gamble with you, the first one's a lot older than the second one.
Oh,
Look at you.
I would say so.
we got our first guest in here.
Well,
We'll
thank
see.
David, I was about to say, if I close my eyes and just listen to you all talk, I could easily pick out which one is which of my.
I second
But
the A.
So
Steve, do we want to
there you
start?
go.
We want to start taking votes.
Yeah, let's start taking votes. Wes, you can call them out. We're looking for two things. We want to vote on what we think is the Dusty and what is our favorite one. Again, it may be the exact same one. It may not be. You may think that a certain one's a Dusty. You may think another one. And so yeah.
So what I'm going to do, because the power of Fred and Freddie is pretty overpowering, and I don't want them to skew the audience.
Now, and remember, Fred might have been trying to throw you off too when he said.
Yeah, I know.
I want to. He may be
you
messing.
don't know
with
what glass he had.
Yeah. I'm gonna save you guys for last.
Save
I'm
them
gonna
for
go to
last.
everyone
For
else
sure,
first.
for sure.
All right.
Okay.
All right. That being said, let's start with Shane. When did you jump in here, buddy?
Yeah. So I'm thinking A is a little bit older, but
Okay.
I prefer black.
All right. So we got. So Steve, you're keeping tally. Right?
I'm keeping track. Yeah. So he says A's the Dusty, B was his favorite. So
So
All
I'm
right.
splitting the vote. So
Splitting the
All
vote.
right.
I'm not wrong.
Hedging his
Yeah.
bets here.
Yeah.
all right. Yeah.
All right. Let's go with Jason Souter.
Normally, like when you've got Dusties, it's the syrup that usually gives them away. But in this one instance, it's confusing because A's got more of the syrup and B's it's just softer. Like it feels more rounded. And so I'm gonna go black with Dusty and favorite.
Okay, so it's double black there, which is B, double B.
Okay.
All right, Eric, let's go with you, sir.
All right. Without having much experience tasting Dusties, I can tell you that my preference of the two would be sample A.
Okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and guess that is also the Dusty.
Okay. I have a question for you. Your name says Eric Johnson, the Iowa one. Is there a non-Iowa Eric Johnson?
We have a Eric Johnson that does these events a lot. It's from Kentucky. So
Oh,
it's,
perfect.
we figured that out when I sent the wrong samples I sent the wrong Eric Johnson, and the other Eric Johnson was like, "Where's my samples?" I'm like, "I sent them to you. Here's the delivery." He's like, "That's not my house." I'm like, "Well, Eric Johnson has them." Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Betsy and Nikki.
Okay.
Yeah, so we actually disagree.
Okay. You can vote independently. Yeah, you're
Yes,
supposed to vote independently.
we will. I think A is the Dusty,
Okay.
and A is my favorite.
Okay.
And A is the favorite. Okay.
I think B is the Dusty. And I think A is my favorite.
A is
Okay.
the favorite. Okay.
It's interesting. I like it. Let's go to the Robinsons. Neil and Melanie.
Right. I think that B or black is the Dusty, and I like it the best too.
All right.
She has a different opinion on
Yeah.
which one she likes.
I agree that the sample black is the Dusty, but I prefer the 114A.
Okay. Steve, you got those?
I got them. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Mr. Whitlatch, Mr. Bob.
A gets both my votes.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Short and right to the point. JL, let's go to JL.
All right, I'm going A, Dusty, and mostly because I think B reminds me of the 114 I've got sitting in my cabinet.
Good reason.
All right.
Which did you like better though? Did you?
Oh yeah.
I tell you, I'm gonna lean A, but man, this is like picking a favorite kid.
Okay. Yeah, they're
All right.
both great. I think.
Oh,
they're both great.
yeah.
Go to Michael.
I think A is the Dusty, and that's my preference of the two.
Okay.
Okay.
A and A. Paul Russo, how are you, sir? Let's go to you.
I think A is the older one, but I prefer B.
All right.
Okay.
Danny Kennard.
All right, I think A is the older one. And B is, I think, is today's, but I prefer A.
Okay. I think that's an A and an A.
Yeah, it was a long way to get there, but we got there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Jim Fosnot. You're on mute, Jim.
I'll make mine shorter. That I'll go A and A as well. I think A is the Dusty, and it's my favorite.
Double A's. All right. Amy Fisher.
I really like the depth of A, and I think the tannins kind of make me think it's the older one. But the black is more, I think, day drink, like any day drinking, like smooth, easy.
Okay.
But so you think A is the Dusty and A is also your favorite, or does the smooth drinker get to you?
I feel like I'd say I prefer the smooth drinker a little bit
Okay.
more.
Okay.
Mood dependent.
All right.
I think we only have the legend. You're next. I think you're up.
Oh, this is an interesting one. He's got a streak here. Everyone pay attention.
A is your Dusty, and A is my favorite.
Okay. Mike Gaskamp, have we been to you, sir? At least
No, sir, not yet.
All right, perfect.
So I'll go double A just based on how well it holds to the glass. A is the older one, and it's also my favorite.
Okay.
All right. Steve, I think we've been through everyone besides yourself and the Noes. Let's go with you.
Okay. I'm gonna go A and A. A
A and
is the
A.
Dusty and A is my favorite.
All right. It looks like the only people we have left are Fred and Freddie. You guys want to take a stab
Did
at
you get-
this?
Bob
Yeah.
Whitlatch, I guess.
Yeah, I got Bob. Yeah, he gave he came in with a quick AA and ran out.
Okay, all right. I'm so busy writing. I'm just laser focused. Okay. All
I
right.
think, for me, I would definitely agree. I think A is the Dusty. And I would say it's my favorite, but maybe to go on a little bit longer journey around it, I like B as well. It's very close to me as well. I think there's a difference. To me, I think A set a little more in the front of my palate with the flavor, the balance of flavor and the differentiation of flavor. B set a little closer to the back. I work on this a little bit, so I kind of knew. I hope, if not, I might retire or quit.
That'll be the press release tomorrow. Freddie Noe retires.
He's not retiring.
And I whacked up the sample pouring. I poured them, put the B glass before the A glass. So we might be a little mixed up, but
you sound like the legend now. You hedge your
pretty
bets
sure.
whenever in doubt. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's A and A.
Come on now.
Right.
All right.
But I do think there's a great balance of flavor that remains. It goes to show you that, it's not, there's differences of production that separate these two products. And a lot of it is kind of the depth and the perception of some of the flavors and how deep they go. So I would say why I choose A over B as my favorite is because I'm saying I'm on a pretty good journey to try to bring some of this flavor back.
Yeah.
So anytime I get to those samples that bring that stuff out, I get giddy about tasting it again, right? So
That's kind of the same. I say A and A, but the A reminded me a lot of some of the older stuff that I drank years ago that Dad and them made. And the older stuff, I'm sure it was a little older back in the day, because like you say, there was a lot of barrels in the warehouses in those early days, so for me, and it's got great nose, it just keeps coming back to you, that vanilla and stuff.
Okay.
So I'll go on, let's say A and A for me.
All right, Wes. So the finals, I think you can figure it out. Just it's easy enough. The favorite was A, 13-5, and 17-3 on the Dusty. So.
All right, so I typically don't do this, but I think I'm going to start doing it with this one. I never give my opinion because I knew ahead of time, but I still want to give my opinion. So here's what I'll say. I before I give you the results, A to me has more of a traditional bourbon complexity to it as far as flavor. So it's a little more caramel, a little more vanilla. It drinks actually more like. To me, like what some of the older heavy wheat mash bills versus rye. B to me is what I think of and what I like to taste when I think of a high rye mash bill. I like that combination of sweet and spicy. I get a little bit of that mint. I get some cherry, some stone fruits. I get the cinnamon, the hot cinnamons on the back end. I think to me, B drinks more, at least in my mind, of what a high rye bourbon drinks like. A drinks a little more like a sweeter bourbon. However, much like has been going on the last few events, it's hard to pull a fast one past you guys. The majority are right. A is the Dusty, and B is the current off the shelf 114. Both are excellent in their own right.
All is right in the world. All is right.
All is right in the
world. The Noes got it right. The legend got it right, keeping his streak going. So, so that's the important things here. So,
unbeaten.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen to himself.
I got to go back to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
In spite of my sinus problems.
The sinus problems. Yeah.
Yeah. Freddie can keep his job. Everything's
Right.
Yeah. There you go.
Fred can retire tomorrow.
And again, I want to be respectful of the Noes time. I can't think of it. Let's just hear a round of applause, first of all, for them both coming on here. That's amazing. So cool.
Thank you guys.
Thank you,
We're
guys.
not
I
gonna keep them too long, but I do think we got a couple minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and you can open up your mic and ask away.
Well, I wanted to ask, Freddie made a comment. He's trying to bring some of those older flavors back. Can he give us any insight to what that might be?
Oh yeah, I'd say I knew that was going to be a question, and I got a good example of something we've already done that showcases just how, what I would say is the things people were striving to be efficient and semblance of same quality, right? Every time. The further you go back, the more variety of quality and probably variety of everything you can think of from what I understand and see in whiskey. So one thing for that example, not to leave you hanging out there, I would say fermentation time has a big one. There was a lot more variation of fermentation time in history from everything I understand. And that has a pretty big difference. You know, you set at a different temperature to achieve the time of fermentation and the way that flavor develops throughout the fermentation process. A lot of it really stems, or I guess a lot of what you unlock in a barrel stems from what you do in fermentation and in yeast choices. So that is it's one of the first things we've kind of ventured out and experimented on trying to go back to some of this flavor. And the examples we have are very night and day. I would say night and day as far as differentiation. You can definitely tell a difference in them. But again, it's about kind of just the nuances of how those flavors have come out. I would also say the amount of copper utilized in distillation has gone up substantially since this has been made. That's a little more scientific of a way to try to get around that scenario. But essentially, you know, we use copper to strip out ethyl carbamate. But one of my first days in there was, what else is it kind of stripping out? Is one thing I've always said is it's got to be taking out other things besides ethyl carbamate. And we know it does. So the use of copper, while it helps clean the whiskey, it also probably lightens it or probably makes it a little more singular, I guess I would say, at a certain extent. And again, a lot of that has to do with proof you're distilling at. There's just 50,000 factors that go into some of the things we're looking at. But I think a lot of it has to do with they were inefficient, and I'm now trying to be purposefully inefficient into some of those areas that they were inefficient in, to see if we can replicate some of that flavor, right? Because there's certain levers you can pull, and we know that those aren't the ones that cause some of the stuff that we're seeing. So it's probably going back and trying to be that right there, purposefully inefficient in certain aspects.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. What else you guys want to know?
There's a question on the chat I'll ask looks like Eric Johnson's wanting to know how many future batches of Bookers are already named. So I guess the question is how far in advance? Yeah.
Just through the end of the year, right?
Through the end of the year. Now we're kicking around next year's now, getting ready for 2022. But yeah, we're done for the year as far as our batches.
But you start that at.
We started in the fourth quarter,
and it's locked for the whole year.
Gotcha.
We'll know.
Okay. Gotcha.
Couple weeks, we'll have all the names for next year.
Okay. Gotcha. So in the fourth quarter of every year, you taste out and name all the batches for the following.
No. We don't taste them out till right at the time of bottling.
Okay.
So it just comes up with the name.
We just got the name.
Comes up with the name. Gotcha.
First batch is going to be blah blah blah. Second batch, blah blah blah. And then when it comes time, I'll get the samples shortly before it gets dumped. And then we'll pick out what we're going to put in it.
All right.
That's the main thing. We're trying to get a little variation. And that's another thing with the new Freddie Noe distillery. Freddie's going to be able to make it a few more times in smaller runs and have it at different, going into the warehouse at more times during the year, where now it's just made, since the distillery is so big, we're making it at Claremont, you only get to put it in a couple of times a year. So you don't really have as many variations to play with and to mingle together to achieve different flavors. And we're working to get it a little older too. So, it's all our plan to get it,
That's cool.
get it hooked up.
I'll say something. And I don't know if it's a market thing or you guys are seeing this overall, but Booker's was always one that you could get on the shelf, especially when a new batch came out. You'd have months to get it sit there. Now we're at the point where it comes out and it's gone. And even Little Book too, same thing. Little Book was a 1-day event in St. Louis, and that was it. You go searching the second day after you hear it hit the shelves, it's gone. So yeah, are you guys seeing that across the country where it's picked up? Yeah, okay.
That just came from.
And it's not because we're shorting the whiskey. I can promise you that.
Right. It's just
it's
the growth.
Yeah,
the
it's growth,
demand, and it's the thing about Booker's. When we make it 6 to 8 years ago, we planned for so much demand, and as demand grew, we didn't make more. And you can't take. You only got so much Booker's, and when it ages out, that's what I keep telling them. I said, Dad always said you can make more Booker's. Because you can always. Booker's is made
he was
for
right.
Booker's only. You can mingle it in with, say, a Jim Beam in 4 years if you see it getting too much. But there's not. You can't take Jim Beam and put it in Booker's because the distillation is different. It's totally different. So finally, people have started listening a little bit to the Dumbo boys in Kentucky up in Chicago. We have a lot of fun giving them a hard time. But to get it back to get it a little older, you can only bottle so much a year.
Yeah.
And really a little less than you made if you want to get a little older. So it is, demand for it is getting off the chart.
It's off the charts.
I think it's too, you got the toilet paper effects because people, see that it's grown in prominence. We did have some quality issues with that one batch towards the end of 2 years ago, I guess now. I think it made people go into the toilet paper scenario with it. So
see it, buy it,
Right.
We're at the point where you feel like you got to buy it when you see something.
Buy your limit no matter what, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're having trouble getting Old Granddad 114. We were just in Indiana for Thanksgiving and couldn't find it there. So we're going to be in Louisville in a couple weeks. So we're hopeful that maybe we can grab some in Louisville.
Should be
possibly.
Yeah, you should be able to.
That's what I was going to say.
I mean, I've seen it recently, but
yeah, I've seen it in Total Wine in Louisville, so check that out if you can.
Yeah, Total Wine's a good sort of Liquor Barn.
Liquor Barn, either one. Westport Whiskey, probably be that one, and Evergreen, probably the four you want to look at.
Yeah.
Those are 3 good ones to look at in Lowell for sure.
Yeah.
You can check, I think, Liquor Barn and Total Wine online and see if they've got any.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, if they do, you could probably order it, have them reserve it. You could pick it up there. So
do that.
Yeah. Makes life a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I have a question for you. The last time you were on, Freddie, you gave us a heads up about a new label brand coming out called Hardin's Creek. You got any update on that? Do we know when that's going to hit?
Not really. So there's a good opportunity. That'll be, I would say, maybe towards the end of the first quarter of next year.
Okay.
Maybe February, maybe. If it's not then, I'm going to be a gray-haired old man because I'm getting tired of things getting pushed around. We're just doing a lot of maneuvering with some barrels and some supply stuff. It's coming. It's still coming as of right now.
I'm going to buy cases of it when people come over. It's my private. It's my private reserve.
Right.
One. Yeah. Right. Made specifically for me.
Name.
That's right.
I just picked up your cream this past weekend. So, and again, great product, excellent, great price. I mean, that's really cool. So, yeah. So, really,
I like it as well. I think it goes well. It does good in coffee and anything really.
Exactly.
Right?
I like it in coffee, but
what his mother has been doing with it, putting their coffee every morning.
Every morning, huh?
Seems like.
Yeah.
Makes it easier to deal with,
Makes it easier to deal with. Time for just a couple more, if anybody has any. Again, it's so easy. I mean, I love talking to the Noes, and we could do this for hours, but I don't want to take up their time. So, for another question or two. Anybody got
Just a comment, we were at the Bardstown Bourbon Festival this year, and Fred, we missed seeing you, but Fred, you did a great job, and it definitely was a highlight of the festival for us.
Right.
Appreciate it. Glad to hear it. It kind of had me a little out of commission. I did a kidney transplant in April. They had told me to, I think my surgeon said stay out of big crowds, medium crowds, and small crowds. So I drove the golf cart and hauled Freddie and the family down to the festival grounds, and I was just the runner. I was back and forth. I don't know if I got promoted or demoted, but it was all right. Ended up, my neighbors saw me, had to take them down. You know, it was all right. I've heard from a lot of people who did a good job. I'm proud of them.
Yeah.
Heck yeah,
Hopefully
you should
next
be
year
proud
I'll
of
be
that guy.
back in the saddle again.
Yeah, he's doing great things. That's for sure.
Hey,
All right, time for one more. Last question, anybody?
I had a question if you don't mind.
Okay, Michael.
I was wondering
The
get your
Iowa one.
thoughts on the current trend. It seems like in the bourbon industry with the special releases. It seems like Jim Beam has been mostly resistant to it, other than you have the bookers of products that come out with their special batches. But you kind of look across all of the industry, and they have special bottlings with odd finishes and things like that that seem to your point, the toilet paper effect of, are we going to be able to get it, and we need to go run out and buy up the entire thing of it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that as far as the bourbon industry as a whole? I'm just curious from your perspective.
I like it, to be honest with you. I think you've got a place where the consumer is to a place that they're educated and wanting more education on their glass, right? I mean, we're having a discussion tonight about an old glass and a new glass, right? Mm-hmm. So you have that. To me, with all the things that are going on with it, whether it be collecting Dusties, the kind of experimental lines people are doing, I think it's all great in the industry because it's educating people's palates on what flavors are available. That's the whole premise of me for creating Little Book, was to try to expand people's portfolio and their vision of what American whiskey can be. And so, I'm excited about those elements of it. I guess the one thing I'll say that makes me a little hesitant is of what it could be doing is kind of recreating some fragmentation, because there may be a blurred line of what's bourbon and what's finished bourbon, and what's that would be the one thing I don't necessarily know how to navigate or how to help keep straight. But again, I think a lot of it is very good for the industry. I would say a lot of the stuff you see us avoid is because there's got to be a reason if we're going to do it right. I mean, we've been making whiskey for a long time. Just going and buying some barrels from a specific winemaker, those types of things don't matter to us. It's got to be a real tie to the whiskey or a tie to our family or something, or maybe Basil Hayden or his family or something, around their production. So that's what you see a lot of stuff we do is try to stay true to the brand's core. Now we can try to intermingle, and I would say we are trying to intermingle some of those finishes into things, but they don't always work out. And again, when you've got a large list of don't do's, or maybe not necessarily don't do's, but there's not a real good reason to do it, so that's probably something we shouldn't do. It starts to make it tougher in some of those areas. So I think you'll start to see, just to be transparent, more focus on the process of whiskey making and us adjusting maybe a use of a grain or the fermentation time frame to educate people more on those traditional levers that I think have maybe been untouched, as well as some of those. But, some of that stuff is great. It probably brings a lot of people into the industry because it's very widely variant in flavor. But I do think having core, laurels to kind of rest on is something we should never lose sight of as an industry whole, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, once again, let's hear it for the Noes for coming out and being part of this. Really made it a special night for sure. And of course, let's hear it for Master of Ceremonies. Wes Hardin once again has brought it for us. So appreciate it, Wes. Great job, man. Great job. Great job. With that, we'll say goodbye and we'll sign off. And I'll stick around though if you have any questions or anything like that. But we'll go ahead and stop the recorder. For those that missed tonight, we'll go ahead and send them a link to the recording. But yeah, great night and really so much fun with the Noes joining us for this one. Really, really made it special. So
Thanks, Fred and Freddie. Appreciate it.
yeah,
Right,
really
you're
good
welcome.
stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Hey,
All right.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Steve.
Good night.
See ya.
See ya.